Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter and welcome to episode 1 of Nintendo at Night. As you can see, we're tucked in and ready to talk Nintendo, but before we do, if you want to talk to us about anything, be sure to join our Discord. And while you're down there, because the link's in the description, like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. All three things will let us sleep well at night. But Tucker, we
The
are
amount of
here.
sleep puns today are all going to be off the charts.
Yes, because we are here for the inaugural installment of BLB's new Nintendo show, where we get all cozy in bed and chat about a sort of amorphous topic. It's not going to be about going through the news, giving reviews, things
Nah,
of that
nah.
nature. It's going to be something a little bit more long form, maybe something you can have in your ears as you're going to bed. And Tucker, this week
I've
we are
got you in my
talking.
ears as I'm in bed, which is
Yes,
always
as
nice.
you should, as you should. This week, Tucker, we're talking about very simply why we love Nintendo. I figured for a show like this, the first thing I want to do is I want to start on a positive foot. I want to just understand, get it to the heart of why we spend so much time talking about this company and playing their games. So
Yeah.
what we did is we came up with our own personal reasons, but we also solicited some reasons from our audience. And in the future, we really want to make Nintendo at Night a show where you are central to it.
Yeah.
So if you want to contribute thoughts, join our Discord because in there you'll see a little Nintendo at Night channel, and in there we'll ask a question, you will post your response, and it'll be a very fun time. Just like these, I think 10 people did. We got quite a few responses to read through.
Yeah, that's a good amount.
So Tucker, if you're ready, we'll just hop right
I
into
was born
why
ready.
the BLB audience loves Nintendo.
Now, quick question. Can you share this document with me so we can just trade off? So it's not just you talking the whole time?
No.
No? You can't share that with me?
Well, it's in my notes app, but here's what I can do, actually. I can do a little select all and a little copy.
That's a pretty simple feature
I can switch over to that
of
there
modern
goddamn
cellular
Discord
devices.
app.
Yep.
My
Pop onto
message
the
is too
DMs.
long.
Well, that makes sense.
That would make sense. Okay, hold on.
Now, as you're editing this, this can be cut out. I think it should be.
Oh no, this is the best part of the episode so far.
Oh, okay.
All right, so the first member of the BLB community we're going to hear from today is Brandon Alvelo. You might know him from the HP Critical podcast. And he said to us, my reason I love Nintendo is their large cast of characters and franchises. Each of those franchises are unique and fun in their own way. They aren't afraid to try some different things, and they have something for everyone. Now, this is a point I really love about the Nintendo community as a whole because when I think about like PlayStation slate, for instance, and I'm an equally big PlayStation fan as I'm a Nintendo fan, it's pretty homogenized in terms of what they're offering at the top, right? A lot of
Yeah.
third person action. Your Ghosts of Tsushima's don't fall far from your Last of Us's and your God of Wars, right?
Hmm.
But when you talk to people about the Nintendo franchises they love, and when you think about what Nintendo puts out, it's so multifaceted in terms of genre and tone and scope. And I think that's part of why the company has this really elusive appeal to me.
Yeah. I mean, Nintendo, at least from my perspective, I think it's gotten better over the years. And I think one of the big aspects of it is the diversity in their game types. Because if you look back at the NES and the SNES, stuff like that, they had basically platformers and adventure games being Zelda. And Metroid was a platformer, Kid Icarus was a platformer, and Donkey Kong, Kirby, Mario. There's a lot of platformers. And people still to this day who aren't in the Nintendo community think, oh, they just do platformers. It's all just jumping around and bing bong wahoo. But
Yeah.
no, is not entirely incorrect.
No.
But the variety in the franchises that they've started since in the more modern era with your Pikmin and your Splatoon and Xenoblade and Fire Emblem and these games that have entirely different gameplay formats, different
Yeah.
tones, different styles, and very recognizable characters. It's a huge amount of variety, and you don't get that with anyone else. PlayStation is a
Yeah.
close second. Xbox is a distant third, but Nintendo is far and away the best in terms of their variety and a cast of iconic characters, of course, are one of
Uh,
the other big reasons.
yeah, I will say that when you think about PlayStation, maybe towards original PlayStation and PS2, and into PS3, there was more variety than I think with PS4 we started to become a little bit more homogenized. And I think Nintendo trends in that direction a little bit. I think they do a better job at including more franchises and continually drumming up new experiences. But I will say I think that the pinnacle of this Nintendo diversity and creativity was probably fifth generation into sixth generation between, you got your fighting games in Smash Brothers, we introduced Pikmin, we introduced Animal Crossing, we introduced all of these series. We've got spin-offs like Luigi's Mansion. We get our Donkey Kongas and all of these things. So that's part of
Mhm.
the reason that I find those generations in particular so appealing, because you do get such a degree of that variety that we still get today,
Yeah.
considering the rotation of everything and the introduction of things like Splatoon, which is one of, if not my favorite Nintendo franchises. But there was something special about just the explosion of ideas during that generation, which I just really love.
Yeah. The next comment comes from Nathan Ellingsworth. He says Nintendo are a toy company, and as they evolve, each new generation brings better toys for us to play with. Breath of the Wild and Odyssey are the perfect toy boxes for kids and adults to play with, and before that they distilled the joy of play with games like Mario 64. It's the pure fun they offer. Now, this is something that's really interesting because a lot of people would take this as the negative,
Yeah,
as being a toy company, as these games being for everyone. There is a large subsect of gamers who criticize Nintendo for exactly that point.
yeah,
And while I can understand it being not appealing for people who want to be a little bit edgy and like, oh, we're leaving behind our childhoods. I don't want to be associated with the little Fortnite dabbing kids these days.
sure.
Nintendo's willingness to make games that do have breadth of reach in terms of of accessibility, of replayability, of cooperative experiences that other companies don't have, um, is another part of that variety and why they do make things that no one else in the industry does, especially to the quality and scale that they've always made.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think that the Nintendo as a toy company idea, like you said, is kind of thrown around as a pejorative sometimes, even by people who I feel are being dismissive of it. Like I remember Greg Miller used to talk about the Wii U as being a toy and Nintendo
Yeah,
making toys, and I think that saying it with sort of even an undercurrent of condensation is not the word I'm looking for. Condescension is the word I'm looking
sure.
for. Those are
Yeah,
very different concepts.
being consenting.
Uh, I think that misses the forest for the trees, because I think of that Reggie quote about if it's not fun, why bother? And I think
Yeah.
that's just so core to the way that Nintendo's games feel evergreen, not only in terms of how they stand the test of time, but how they stand the test of your personal time. You can play them as a young child and then grow up alongside Nintendo and their newer games, but those older games, and return to them and get something new out of them.
Hmm.
It's part of why I think that the Disney parallel between Nintendo and Disney, which we might want to investigate as a whole episode sometime, is so strong, because you can grow alongside these and they don't lose their appeal. I find that there's a lot of media which I loved as a child that I return to, and it's just not the same. It's so pointed at one particular demographic that you can't really grow with it outside of a nostalgic context. But
Yeah.
Nintendo does focus on fun. They focus on having everybody become engaged and enriched in their worlds, and that is just really special. And that is definitely at the heart of why I love Nintendo in part. Also,
Hmm.
we got another comment here from Toby, who says, "I love Nintendo because they aren't afraid to take risks. Sometimes they pay off and sometimes they don't, but that's what makes them stand out. Their gaming catalog features some of the most wacky and inventive titles, and I always look forward to where they tread next." What do you think about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've always appreciated about Nintendo, even when it doesn't necessarily work well for me, is that they do try new things that end up pushing the entire industry forward. Rising boats, water, whatever,
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
idea with Nintendo applied to their creativity in ways that no other company has. And you think about the risks, quote unquote, that the other companies take, whether that be Sony and Microsoft making the Connect and the Move. There's a lot of things where when they seem to be taking a risk, it doesn't pay off as well. And I think it's
yeah,
because they don't put their all into it. Unfortunately, Microsoft put a little too much in the Connect, but
Sure.
they didn't put enough real focus behind it to make quality games that were selling that experience past what the Wii was having, which was Nintendo putting all their first party studios and their effort really doubling down on why this is a great idea and causing a huge uproar because of it, because the Wii outsold everything else that generation and it was accessible to everyone else, and gaming suddenly became a much wider thing, and it's because Nintendo took a risk but put everything they had behind it.
Yeah. So Toby accidentally activated my trap card and gave me the opportunity to talk about Gunpei Yokoi, who I feel is a man that is so important to who Nintendo is as a company, but he sometimes gets forgotten among the greats of your Iwatas and your Miyamotos. But Gunpei Yokoi was so central to the way Nintendo develops hardware, the
Yeah,
concept of lateral thinking with their technology of taking weaker technology and putting a fun new spin on it that results in an out of the box experience. That sort of hardware innovation is what leads software innovation. So you think about the Wii, you think about that blue ocean machine, that appeal of let's talk to people who aren't traditional gamers. Let's find out how we can make them love this sort of spirit of fun that Nathan was talking about, right? And I think it's that willingness to take those risks and to look elsewhere that makes them so special. This is again another cornerstone reason of why I love the company. You're not going to get a Wii remote from the others. You got the PlayStation Move because you got the Wii remote first.
yeah,
Nintendo is ahead of the curve because they have to be. Because when their back is against the wall, it's when they innovate and they try something new. The GameCube was a categorical failure. And it
hmm,
was because of that that we ended up with the Wii. And
yeah,
the fact that they were able to make that pivot and take that risk is at the heart of any creative endeavor that want to cut yourself free and start over and try something new and radical is really inspiring, and part of why I'm so engaged by the company and so engaged by an idea like Nintendo Labo, even if it doesn't pan out.
yeah.
Again, it's smart, it's different, it's kind of mischievous. I really like when Nintendo takes these kinds of risks.
Hmm. Tim says, I love Nintendo because of their commitment to innovation. They are responsible for shaping the gaming world in a way no other company can claim to be. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
a fantastic comment, but that was exactly what we just talked about. I think our comment still stand true approximately 30 seconds later. Um,
yeah.
do you have anything else to add on top of that? Um, yeah, I mean, I kind of said my piece.
Yeah, I agree. I think I basically covered it, but I really like this idea of shaping the gaming world. And we talked about
Yeah,
that influence a little bit in terms of, your PlayStation moves and your Connects, but Nintendo really does trailblaze, and I
yeah,
feel like that's a point that sometimes gets lost. But even in the modern sense, I doubt that you would get a Steam Deck if you hadn't gotten a Switch first. If
yeah,
Nintendo
of course.
hadn't continued to prove the viability of the handheld market, even today, when maybe their influence isn't as overt as it used to be,
Hmm.
it's still present. And you, even from a software perspective, the ways that Nintendo strikes something new and different, like with the Breath of the Wild, and you see
Yeah,
other devs begin to have that soak into their work. Not to say that they're becoming imitations, but to say that Nintendo just has an outsized influence, which
yeah.
brings everyone else up with them. Now we're gonna hear from Woni, who says, I love that Nintendo was founded by an artist who drew cards so people could legally gamble if they wanted to, and how that mischievous creative spirit has carried forward into their work ever since.
Yeah, I mean, that whole connection is just wild, and
Yeah,
Nintendo has leagues more interesting of a history than any other company that I can think of. It wasn't just started by a couple of people who knew what they wanted to do in terms of making games or getting into the industry. Like Xbox was intended to compete with the
yeah,
PlayStation, and but Nintendo was started long before any of those people were even born, and they just were screwing around. They made
yeah,
all sorts of variety of different things, a lot of which don't they still hold a little bit of influence, but you don't hear people talking as much about the Hanafuda cards and things of that nature. But it is that transition from screwing around with tons of different industries, moving into toys, moving those toys into electronic toys, and then into Pong console, and then into uh, arcade games, and then home consoles. There is a lineage there
Yeah.
that tracks in a more interesting way than any other game company, hardware or software. I mean, the fact is that without Nintendo making Donkey Kong and then transitioning into Mario Bros, the the platforming genre, which affects all companies, would not have blown up as much as it was. Like there's such a influence there of their history that no other company can even claim to have.
Yeah, I think you basically said it perfectly. I don't really have a whole lot more to add than that, but yeah, Nintendo's history, as we traditionally think of them purely from the gaming space, as being from, maybe the Game and Watch on, so the 80s
Yeah.
on, is fractional compared to everything they've done. And when you read about like just the fucking bizarre stuff that happened in the pre-gaming era
It's some
Nintendo,
weird shit. Then they
it's
they had like love hotels too,
they
right?
had love hotels. There's something with the Yakuza in there too. It's really extraordinary, and something I really love, and I just want to touch on
And yet
briefly.
Yakuza's not on their consoles.
Nope.
Fucked up,
Uh,
man.
the mischievous creative spirit has carried forward into the work ever since, and talked about it earlier. But Nintendo Labo is such a brilliant synthesis of that
You
toy
used the words
era.
mischievous there, even before we had read this comment. There's
I
we're on the same wavelength.
I think
That
it's because I was compiling these, and then that word was stuck in my head.
oh, that's
So
right. You already read these.
yeah, I stole Woney's thunder a little bit, but no, I love seeing those parallels. And there's even, d- do you remember? You must remember Club Nintendo, right? Did you ever do Club Nintendo?
Never had it. No.
Well, I did, and there was a reward I never claimed, but it was Grill Off with Ultra Hand, where the Ultra Hand Nintendo toy, it was just very simple, high score based game. But I love that Nintendo never forgets their heritage. Even
Yeah.
Clubhouse 51 Worldwide Games have the Nintendo Hanafuda cards in there.
Yeah.
Really great little detail.
Next comment from Andrew Orozco, who says, "Just want to chime in. I love this sleeping Kirby graphic inserted here," and I think that probably was kind of what inspired this whole thing. Is you screwing around with graphics of sleeping Nintendo characters as you do. I don't know. You like gifs. You like your funny little key arts. Um,
Yes.
but the sleeping Kirby graphic is a big part of our charm and our appeal here at Nintendo at Night.
Yes.
You got another one? Oh wait, hold on. Oh,
Oh,
he
there's more. There's a whole.
oh
There's a little
shit.
second half there.
He pressed the tab the return button, which is not something I ever do. Also, I love Nintendo for making handhelds work as a concept for so long. Because of them, my trips away from home were a little less boring. I mean, yeah, when we talk about Nintendo influencing the industry, it was them proving the viability of the handheld market with the Game Boy that probably influenced the industry more than anything they've done. I mean, the fact is that we had tons of imitators and Atari and Sega and trying to get into those markets, but they were doing it mostly in part because they were trying to overtake the
Yeah.
Game Boy, which obviously never happened. And is another reason why you see the Steam Deck, people saying it's a Switch killer. Okay, we'll track that backwards. Vita was
Yeah.
not the 3DS killer. PSP was not the DS killer. Fucking Sega Nomad, Atari Lynx, those weren't the Game Boy killers. Nintendo, with their focus always uh on handheld market, is something that no one else can claim to do because even the runner up being Sony, they still failed in their second attempt.
Yeah. When you think about Nintendo, I think that the reputation and the sales trajectory of handheld Nintendo and home console Nintendo are different in some respects. Nintendo's handhelds have always done absurd business. And when
Mhm.
when you think of the Switch as a handheld instead of a home console, its sales success really does track against a DS and a 3DS and such, more so than it does against the pretty much downwards decline of Nintendo's home console sales wise, say for
Yeah.
the Wii. Um, which speaks to the way that they really, like you said, pioneered that space and continue to have a stranglehold over it. Again, going back to Gunpei Yokoi just a little bit, that sort of low price accessibility facilitated really affordable handhelds to the
I
point
like to call
where,
him Geo.
sure, that I can ride with that. I can ride with that. But there's a lot of people outside that Nintendo space that'll grab a handheld, but might be a little bit hesitant to go after a home console. I think that Nintendo just understands that space so beautifully that it becomes really seamless to have a Nintendo device
Hmm.
in your collection, especially a handheld one. And
Yeah.
I've always loved them personally. Long rides to school have been a big part of a lot of my life. So a lot of my fondest memories of Nintendo games are handheld.
If we're talking about personal experiences with handheld gaming, a lot of my formative gaming years are playing on my DS when I'm not supposed to be.
Of
I
course.
have a very specific memory. We're doing a little story time here. Story time Nintendo at night. A little bedtime story to put you to sleep. As I was supposed to be, playing Pokemon Platinum in my bed at night. I was in one of the, I can't remember which one, but there's like the little island off the northeast of Sinnoh that had the battle area on it, and a couple extra routes and stuff after you beat the game. And I was exploring that area, and I was battling like an ace trainer with my Breloom, and then my mom came in and caught me playing my DS under my covers, and I've never been more scared in my entire life, thinking she was just going to thrash me. But a lot of my game time in that time, because my mom was very strict in how many hours of games me and my brother could play per week, it wasn't even a daily thing. A lot of it was sneaking that in handheld form, and I think that's what part of why the Switch appeals to me so much is I'm very used to not being confined to sitting in front of a giant screen to play my
Yeah.
games because I played so much on my DS as a kid.
Yeah, it just speaks to how we grew up. Like playing Skyward Sword HD, I find myself in handheld mode becoming so sucked into that world. To me, there's something about the really personal connection you form with that handheld device opposed to the TV, which immerses me more in games sometimes, which I find pretty interesting.
Got four
Now,
more.
yeah, now we got Kieran writing in who says, simply put, the games, they're imaginative, accessible, engaging, and for want of a better word, magical.
Yeah, I mean, we were making the comparison earlier to Disney, or tangentially at least, and that possibly being a large discussion in the future because I mean, look, I'm putting it out there. This is a show for positivity, but I'm not a Disney fan, and I never really was. But a lot of that energy that comes for a lot of people from Disney, for me, is Nintendo and Pixar. Pixar's
Yeah,
my Disney, and of course they are Disney now, but fucking whatever. Is magical whimsy was something I always loved as a kid. I was always someone who looked at my whole litany of different kinds of toys. I was like variety in the things that I was playing with, and colorful worlds and the imagination that comes out of something like Toy Story, which is probably one of the most influential um, pieces of content on my life, alongside Pokemon, which just the idea of all sorts of crazy creatures that are nothing like anything you've seen in this universe are magically created out of the minds of these dozens of wonderful artists. That was hugely influential to me in terms of not only how I like my games, but how I experience any kind of art and my own imagination. I mean, I came up with dozens and dozens and dozens of imaginary friends when I was, sitting on my by myself on the playground, uh,
yeah.
because I loved Pokemon so much, and that inspired me because of how diverse and creative and magical the designs were.
I agree completely. I used to have a swing set in my yard when I was younger, and I would spend probably an hour or 2 hours a day just swinging on the swings. And most of that time was spent imagining my own Nintendo adventures, whether that was Pokemon related or Zelda related.
Sure.
Those are the two I'd constantly go back to. It was just so special. They really capture your imagination in a way that other games for me just don't. And I frankly do believe that the majority of Nintendo games are better than the majority of what the rest of the industry puts out.
Yeah.
And I try not to consider myself a fanboy. I always try to temper my
Well.
love for Nintendo, but I have a very big bias for Nintendo, opposed to a fanboyism for it.
Mhm.
But part of that is just admitting that yes, I think their games are exemplary, and it comes from bias, but I also think it comes from fact. I think it comes from the elegance of their design and the imagination of their art direction and everything. There is a reason that when you look at the list of the best games of all time, a lot of those are Nintendo titles.
Yeah.
There's just something really special there.
Hmm. Mel says that it's that Nintendo's willingness to let a series rest. Perhaps it goes on for too long for some series, but the fact that they don't feel the need to have Zelda, Mario, Mario Party, Mario Kart every year lets me at least hope the game will be quality. This is an interesting one.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily know if I agree with this. I mean,
yeah,
to the point of it not being every year is, of course, very true. If we had a Zelda game, a mainline Zelda game every single year, the quality would start to drop, as you've seen with, in Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, and even
yeah,
Pokemon to an extent. Um, but the willingness to let series rest, I think, is a double-edged sword.
yeah,
From that perspective, I think it's great. But if it's not one of those main tier franchises like they were mentioning, it they usually don't give their B and C tier franchise enough attention. And I think that can actually be a problem with them is they're like, okay, well, we've done this. We don't necessarily need to bring it back or keep going in a way that does let creative ideas and great franchises die off in an unfortunate way. So it's a double-edged sword, but I can certainly see where you're coming from.
yeah. It's this is a complex one, and inspired a bit of a conversation between Mel and Kieran, kind of going back and forth on this. And I think that the point where I totally agree with Mel is that avoiding annualization for these franchises, which would just make Nintendo fucking
Yeah,
buckets of money if they came out every year, says a lot about the ways that every time a 3D Mario releases, a 3D Zelda releases, it's an event because there's
yeah,
been
of
so much
course.
time and thought put into these games to make them feel distinct. You look at the way Mario has traveled from 64 to Odyssey. That's incredible.
Yeah, and there's
How
not that
many
many games in there in terms of the 3D ones.
it's not that many games in there and they all feel so distinct, and of course your Galaxy 2s and things, right? But it's not purely iterative year after year after year.
Yeah.
But I agree with you.
The ones that are iterative are the exceptions to the rule, which I think is the most interesting thing.
Yeah, and usually that leads the quality to suffer. The new Super Mario Brothers games we were talking about before we started recording, and that's a very obvious answer of not annualization, even though it came close, but of just not taking the
Sometimes
time.
less than animalization. Two
Yes,
and you released in the same year, which is really stupid.
yeah, not taking that time to go back to the drawing board results in probably Nintendo's weakest games. So their willingness to
Yeah.
take that to give themselves that space is great. But you're completely right. I'm a big Metroid fan, a big Star Fox fan, a big F-Zero fan. So of
Hmm.
course I'm gonna chafe at this concept a little bit because when you hear Nintendo say, "Well, we'd like to bring F-Zero back, but we did GX and GX is basically perfect," and I largely agree, but that means that we're out of ideas, so we can't make a new one till we have a new hardware gimmick. It's silly. So I think that the XS moves in both directions.
Yeah. I mean, there is a benefit to at least continuing iteration in small ways,
Yeah,
or continuing iteration would allow a series to progress in small ways. If you let an F-Zero die off for literally 15 years or whatever it's been since the last one,
yeah,
there that is more harm to that series than if you had one every 6 years.
yeah,
Even if they were similar, they would have changed enough. The interest would have stayed greater in the series. And when I think inevitably they bring back F Zero, maybe not in this generation, whatever in the future, it'll be really exciting, but it won't be in the zeitgeist enough for that to really be a huge seller. And then Nintendo will be like, okay, this wasn't a huge seller. We don't necessarily need to try again, which I think is unfortunate. But I think you were right on another comment. And one thing that I first thought when I was reading this is they do have an annualized series, which is Pokemon. And that I think has led to a lot of frustration with Game Freak making titles that do feel too iterative that and not having enough polish and time
yeah,
put behind them. If Game Freak took what Nintendo does with their Pokemon's and Zelda, or sorry, Mario's and Zeldas, and gave them more time in between releases, they would come out feeling more inspired, more fresh, more events. And of course, Pokemon is still an event whenever it comes out because it's
yeah.
the best selling media franchise of all time. But it does feel a lot with that franchise, even though it's my favorite franchise, like they should just take a step back occasionally.
I agree almost entirely with what you said. I think the one point I might push back on a little bit is F-Zero or an analogous franchise not being in the zeitgeist after coming back. I think that a Nintendo taking things out of the vault gives them a bigger splash. Metroid Dread, I think, is as huge as it is in part because it's been so long.
Yeah,
So I think that if F-Zero came back next year after nothing, it would be by orders of magnitude the biggest game of the franchise and the one that has the most push behind it because the people who are setting the tenor for conversation from the biggest scale to us to include us up in those ranks, we do beat that drum. But the fact of the matter is, what about the millions of people who have no experience with F-Zero? You're totally
mhm,
right about that. Why isn't GX available on Switch, for instance? That's a whole nother sack of potatoes, right? But I think there is something to be said for that hiatus for a lot of different reasons. Perhaps it would give us that splashback on the scene, but maybe I shouldn't have left the scene in the first place. Maybe we
yeah,
should be supporting it with legacy content in the interim, yada, yada, yada. It's very complex. Basically, what I'm saying is Nintendo, your B and C tier franchises are just as interesting, if not more interesting, than your S tier. So let's
yeah.
get them moving.
Yeah, and I think the point I was trying to make is not that if F-Zero came back, it wouldn't be a big deal, but that if F-Zero had had a good game every 5 years
Yeah,
since then, this it still would be just as big of a deal, if not bigger, because the
sure,
franchise would be in the zeitgeist, would have more fans.
sure.
The leaving it for a long time and bringing it back appeals to Nintendo fans and people who are into game history, but there's no appeal to this next generation, young people younger than us,
Yeah,
for F-Zero other than, oh yeah, that's the guy from Smash, and that's what it's been delegated to because they have dropped the franchise for so long.
you're totally right about that. Well, this next one here from Lori, I got to set up a little bit. So Lori, posts a lot about his experiences introducing his young son to Nintendo. And so I'm actually going to put a link to his reply in the top of this description because he put some photos of him and his son that I think are really inspiring and really build upon what he writes here. And he says, after playing Skyward Sword on Saturday, my boy and I went adventuring in quote unquote Farron Woods yesterday and started building a clay model of Skyloft this morning. This is why we need Nintendo. And the pictures are of them together in the woods and making this little clay sculpture and everything. And I really think this is a beautiful anecdote. And it's I if anything, this is the encapsulation of why Nintendo matters.
Hmm.
It's not mechanical. It's not about even innovation. It's about this personal resonance.
Yeah.
It's about making media that people can grow up with. That's what Nintendo's about.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't our last comment, it's our second to last one. But it brings us back full circle to where we started. Is Nintendo is something that you can grow up with, and it is for everyone in a way that very, very few video games are. And we, of course, it'll be difficult to future project, but um, the games and series that are newer that aren't Nintendo that track alongside that in terms of childhood influence are few and far between. I think really one of the only ones that stands up there alongside them is Minecraft, and I know that from
Sure.
personal experience. Well, it's yet to see if in 20 years people are talking about how they with Fortnite or whatever it is that they have those deep childhood memories and were being creative with what they were given. But with my connection to Minecraft and my connection to Nintendo, I can say, and as I mentioned here, those personal stories and the ways that they resonated with me then and that still do now are timeless in a way that a lot of games media doesn't have. And it is important to have that out there, even if it does turn away some of the edge lords of the games industry or games community, whatever.
Yeah.
It's important to exist, and I think obviously the fact that Nintendo games are still some of the best selling games of every year, regardless of the complainers, shows that it is still important to have that.
Yeah, I think that if you're talking about games people grow up with, there's games that trend and games that are transcending of that.
Yeah.
Uh, I think Minecraft is kind of the only exception to the roulette of Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, whatever. There's always that game that supplants it in the kind of cultural moment that becomes the big game that is adorned everywhere when you go out in public, right?
Yeah,
You're in Target and there's fucking Fortnite back to school pencils or whatever, right? But those die. Those are cyclical. Nintendo isn't. The way
mhm.
that kids took Mario 3 lunchboxes to school back when that came out is the same way kids are taking Mario Odyssey lunchboxes to school now. And
I need a
that's
Mario Odyssey lunchbox. That's a
dude,
great idea.
you would pick up so many girls on the UNL campus with a fucking Odyssey lunchbox. I'll get you one. I'll get you
Thank you. Thank you. Go fund me, guys. Get me a Super Mario Odyssey lunchbox so I can finally touch some grass.
one.
As I'm using a phrase I'm not particularly familiar with, but
The last comment here comes from BLB's own intern, Abby, and really the pioneer of the BLB community.
yep.
And if you want to talk to him, he's mainly in the Discord, and he's a great person to talk to. So come join him. He writes, I like Nintendo because of all the great memories the company has given me. Many normally awkward interactions have turned into great friendships because of the Wii. The Wii also made video games accessible to a younger me, which in turn made me get a 3DS. That led on to the Switch, where some of my favorite games lie. The Switch has led me to new YouTube channels like BLB and communities like Smash Brothers.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of just the encapsulation of everything we've been talking about here.
Yeah,
And I think if we pull one thing out of it is uh, connections with other people through
yeah,
Nintendo. I think almost every one of my close friendships in elementary school, which of course really your first friendships, came from Pokemon.
yeah,
I met kids on the playground who had their DSs. I remember taking our Pokewalkers out on the playgrounds with Heart Gold and Soul Silver, following the releases of and the announcement of Black and White, and sharing those stories and playing pretend Pokemon battles and talking about, okay, what is your favorite Pokemon? What regions you play? Which games? What's the difference between the games? For me, of course, all Pokemon based and occasionally Smash Brothers,
yeah,
but these games that did create all of my childhood friendships.
yeah,
The few that they were, it was bonds built mostly over Pokemon, and
yeah,
so I can't say enough about how much that series means to me as a person and the connections that I've made, and even with my brother is he and I had DSs and Pokemon Diamond and Pearl growing up. And since then, we've each bought one of each of the games. We've always been trading, we've always been battling, we've always been talking about Pokemon and watching the anime and collecting cards together. My connection with my brother, though it's weakened in recent years, we he still will come in my room and see me playing Pokemon and want to borrow my Switch, even though he doesn't have one of his own because he loves Pokemon, and we can instantly go back to being 7 and 8 years old and just piling our cards up and flipping through our guide of platinum or whatever.
yeah,
Nintendo's childhood memories and the connections that I've made are some of the most important things in my entire life.
yeah. I I agree completely. I remember switching schools for seventh grade after basically knowing the same kid since we were like 4,
Hmm.
and making new friends through Pokemon and through Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
Those are really the main games we'd play together, and that just kind of followed me throughout my entire life. As I've gotten older and become more engaged in the industry as both a fan and as a critic, I've come to love Nintendo for what they offer mechanically in all of these things and what they've contributed to the industry. But when I try to find the root of my love for Nintendo, it has nothing to do with gameplay first design and blue ocean corporate
Hmm.
philosophy. As much as I love to talk about these things and I talk about them with a great reverence, it's about coming home after feeling stressed out because I didn't have many friends and I didn't know what to do, and I'd come home and I'd play Mario Kart, or I would play Paper Mario, or I was
Hmm.
playing Zelda. I'd play Star Fox. It didn't matter. These these games were important to making the friendships I did have, but they're even more important to giving me these worlds to fall in love with and to grow up alongside in the ways that I've shared those connections with other people. Like my girlfriend Jean is not a huge gamer. She had a Wii, right? But getting the opportunity to introduce her to these characters and seeing her love Captain Toad Treasure Tracker and playing Mario Kart and all these things, it reminds me of why I love the company because it connects with you personally and their games are friendly and these worlds mean something. And even at the darkest points I had when I was the most anxious and I had the least friends and the most stresses, I always had these characters in these worlds. And that means more than any evaluation of the way Mario's movement in Odyssey contributes to game flow ever will for me,
Hmm.
even though it's that latter that I talk about so much more. Nintendo is just special in a way that has shaped me inside the industry and outside the industry in a way that I could never repay.
Yeah, and these kind of stories and talking about our personal connections. Of course, this is what this whole first episode is about. But I think really intention is the entire series to be about talking about why Nintendo has influenced us so much and why we're sitting here literally in our beds as comfortable as we can possibly be. Although I have
Yeah,
a little bit of back pain right now, it's probably because I'm
sure.
like
It's a bit
asleep.
hot in this room too, I will
Yeah,
say.
is that this is really one of the only formats, long term conversational, not long form, excuse me, and calm, that we can express these kind of stories
Yeah,
in a sitting down and talking snappily about something that is relevant to more people format. It's very difficult to get into a mood and a flow where you're sharing our childhood stories like this.
yeah,
It's difficult to sell to a publication an article about why Pokemon connected you to your friends as a kid. That doesn't get clicks, and it's
yeah,
why I'm very excited that we have this outlet to talk about it. Literally, be comfortable and talk
yeah,
about stories that are less appealing overall, but I think have a meaning. And I'm hoping that, if anyone who's watching this, share your own stories in the comments. Leave them on our Twitters, be a part of our conversation, because you sharing your stories influences us to share our stories. A little bit of inside baseball here. Right before we started this episode, we both realized neither of us had come up with our own answer
yeah,
to this question, which Abram lied about at the beginning of this episode, saying that we did, which is not true. But as we've gone through each of these things and each of these points about Nintendo and reading what other people have commented, I realized, wow, I've kind of just gone through everything that I
yeah.
could want to talk about of why I love Nintendo. And there's one other thing that I want to sort of bring up as my final point. It's not as
Sure.
culmination-y as I'm doing right now, but thank you very much for commenting, and I hope that if you're watching this, you continue to be a part of this community. I think we
Absolutely.
probably, as the list of people who are commenting grows, we'll have to, pick and choose a few to talk about per episode. But there's always a chance that you influence us to have a conversation like this. So leave your comments.
Yeah, it's to peek back behind the curtain a little bit. It's my intention that these episodes end up shaking out to about an hour long, and
Hmm.
so I really want to do my best to have everyone's voice included.
Yeah.
And so kind of the silver lining of being a small channel and starting a new series is that yeah, you write to us, we're gonna address what you said, and
Yes.
I really want that to become the heart of the show because we have stories to tell, but I it's hard to open up and feel inspired to tell that story unless somebody else kind of gives you that in, and I think these comments did a beautiful job at that. So
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think it's been a great first episode.
100%. This went way better than I could even have
Yeah,
imagined. And also, recording in bed is going a lot better than I could have ever imagined. I honestly
yeah,
thought this was gonna be a categorical failure. The microphone was gonna fall over. The
yeah.
lighting would look terrible. And of course, there's ways I can improve it in the future. Yeah, maybe I don't need the flannel uh, pants that I have on right now in 86-degree weather. Um, as you can't see them, so it doesn't add
Right.
anything to the ambiance. But I promise you, I have pajama pants on right now. Um,
I will tell you categorically, I do not have pants on right now.
that good. I don't know how to respond to that. But if I'm going to give my final thing and what's my answer to this, I was always thinking about, okay, now what have what has each person brought up? What have they not brought up? What is the final thing I want to talk about? Is I think one of the greatest things about Nintendo, while this isn't the main reason that I love them, I covered that and the other things, is how well their games hold up.
Sure.
This past year, if you look back on our channel, we have reviewed a lot of the classic Nintendo games. We've introduced ourselves to the roots of these series that we've loved, and the games are still, while they might not hold up perfectly, they are still very, very fun in ways visually and mechanically that most game companies can't say. I love going back to old games, but if it's not Nintendo, there's always that little bit of worry in my head that this isn't going to hold up. It's going to
Yeah.
have some weird mechanical thing. It's going to be Resident Evil with tank controls. It's going to be a PS1 game that really doesn't hold up visually. It's going to have some element that is making me mildly dread going back to it and having to get used to that older whatever it is. But with Nintendo games, I think because they were so forward thinking, so influential, and have maintained their quality so highly throughout the years, we can go back to something like A Link to the Past, like Donkey Kong Country, like Mario 3 or World, and they don't have that hurdle to jump over.
Yeah.
That they're an old game, and on top of all of this, they don't go for cutting edge graphics for realism. Their games still look phenomenal. You look at something like Wind Waker or Mario 3, those games compared to their contemporaries look so much better today. And their art styles and their colors are still phenomenal to look at. So, from both those regards, the games just hold up better than anything else in the industry.
I agree completely, and we get different experiences out of them, which is so fun. The way we view Mario 3 is so different than the way somebody who played it when it was new views
Yeah,
Mario 3, and the ways that those perspectives can converge and kind of sit in concert, but kind of sit in opposition, and where that all shakes out, it makes discussing Nintendo so interesting.
yeah.
So I think we're about done though.
You don't have your own?
Well, I think I kind of shared mine already in what I was kind of spouting out about, to be honest. It's just about it's about that deeper personal connection, about
Sure.
this sort of je ne sais quoi, if you will, the ways that the company and the games were there for me when I needed them most, and the ways that they've grown alongside me. I can't pinpoint why I love Nintendo. I can't look at my cat that I've had since I was in third grade and say, "Hey, Paul, I love you because blank."
Hmm.
I think that it's predicated on where you came from, right? And I came from a childhood where Nintendo informed my gaming taste and my social connections, and informed a sense of comfort for me that has persisted. And going into college, I was very nervous. I'm a
Yeah.
socially anxious person. I'm an OCD person. I'm not a person that's very good at planning or very good at most things that adults can do. So I went in and I was thinking, man, I'm stressed, but I've got Link's Awakening. You got
Hmm.
Luigi's Mansion 3, right? And they become touchstones. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing I did when I was a kid, looking forward to Mario Galaxy 2 and Wii Sports Resort and everything. So things change, you grow, but Nintendo's grown alongside me in a way that is just very special.
That I'm glad I pushed you to do a little bit more, because I think ending it on a personal note like that is what we want this show to be. It
Yeah.
is really opening ourselves up to this kind of conversation, and I hope those of you listening and watching learned a little bit something about us, and showed that we can show our personality on our content in a way that you probably don't really get from a lot of other stuff. I've
Yeah,
never seen uh, YouTube content where people are in their beds before. So hopefully this is something new from multiple angles.
I agree. And we'll be back very shortly. You know what? I'm even open to saying what topics you want us to cover next. Not even responses. If there's something sort of an area you want us to delve deeper into, maybe early Nintendo memories or whatever, we'd be more than happy to solicit those kinds of inquiries also. But
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us on this maiden voyage of Nintendo at Night. I'm really excited about this series. I know Tucker's excited about it. I'm going to speak for him, um, and I'm just going to speak for both of us by saying thank you again, and we'll catch you real soon. Again, join our Discord if you want to become more engaged in Nintendo at Night and just BLB overall. And like the video, subscribe. You know what to do. Now we're gonna drift off to sleep here.
Okay, yeah, good. You should enjoy this too.